Mari, thank you very much for your time and for joining Breakfast at Kuznach, a series of interviews about Jung and the Jungians or post-Jungians. We are in your praxis in Zurich in a beautiful room. You told me a little bit of the story of this room and this building. Would you like to share it with our audience?
Of course, I'd be glad to. I was fortunate to get this room when I moved to Switzerland in 2003 from Chicago. Walking down the street, I saw a sign advertising an apartment here. So my wife and I moved into the apartment, and in addition, they offered me this room. So we had an apartment downstairs and this room upstairs. And we moved out of the apartment since into the country, but I kept this room, and I'll never give this room up as long as I can keep it. This is in a building that whose roots go back to Roman times. 2,000 years ago, they were renovating just before I moved into here. But 2002, they did a complete renovation of this building, or restoration, I should say. And they discovered Roman remains in the basement. So the foundations go way back to the beginning of Zurich in Roman times. And then in the Middle Ages, this was built into a bourgeois living space just down the street from the Grossmünster, and parades would come by here in the Middle Ages, flags, and very colorful area of town. This is called the Old Town, of the Niederdorf. It's had a colorful history. In the 18th century, a man named Solomon Gessner owned this building, and he was a well-known artist in his day, painter, poet, and ceramicist. He made beautiful ceramics. But he was also a writer and publicist, and he founded the newspaper, the Neue Zürcher Zeitung, is his creation in the late 18th century. And he, because of his name and was well known, became acquainted with Goethe. And Goethe had a good friend in Zurich named Lavater, who was a phrenologist and the minister at the St. Peter's Church across the river. And Goethe visited Zurich a couple of times to see his friend, and also came over here into this building. So Goethe actually walked into this building, spent some time here, gave it a very special name and atmosphere. There's a plaque outside that tells you that. And then when Mozart was traveling through Europe, he was 10 years old, his father took him on a tour, was making money off of him, this little prodigy who had already written a symphony or two and was playing his violin in Paris, and they went to Geneva, and then going back to Salzburg, they came through Zurich and spent a few days here, and he came to this house, and there's a picture of him playing a drawing of him playing his violin. I think of it in this room. I don't know if it was this room, but in this building for sure. So we have Mozart and Goethe, great poet, great musician, and so the atmosphere is very nice. When I walk into the building, I'm always glad to be here, and I like working in this room. This is where I see students for training analysis. I do some supervision, teaching, and so I consider this my analytic space, the sacred space of analysis.
So interesting that Goethe was here, and this myth, this story about Jung being the grandson of Goethe.
Yeah.
Who was Carl Gustav Jung, or even who is your own Carl Gustav Jung?
Well, they're two different people, of course. There's a historic Jung who was, in his time, he was extremely well known throughout the Western world and even beyond. He's on the cover of Time magazine. He was a famous man, and people came from all over the world to work with him. He was considered one of the founders of psychoanalysis after Freud. Freud's crown prince, his great student who parted company and left the master to go his own way when he was in midlife crisis time, and then found himself and became a Jungian after that through his active imagination, creation of the Red Book, and so on. And so I think historically, he's a very important figure of the late 19th or 20th century, mid-20th century. who created a body of work that will be studied, I think, as long as people can read and are interested in psychology. I think it has real lasting value. And I think more than Freud's. I go back and read Freud sometimes. I actually first read Freud before Jung, as most people did, and knew of Freud's name before I knew of Jung. But I've studied Jung now for, I don't know, since the late 60s and until today, and I still read him with great interest and pleasure. It doesn't wear out. So I'm thinking it has lasting value, that Jung will be seen historically as one of the figures in the Catena Aurea, as it's called, the golden chain of teachers and geniuses, like his great-great-grandfather Goethe was in a different genre. Jung was also a poet in his own way, but I think a very, very significant historical figure. Now, for me personally, I have my own Jung, I guess. I think of him as a sort of uncle. I can identify with him. I grew up in a pastor's household also. My father was a minister. We changed places several times in my childhood. It has a very special feeling to grow up in that kind of situation. It's a very political situation. It's a very glass bowl situation. Everybody's looking at you. I was the older of two children. I have a younger sister, much younger, as Jung did, a much younger sister. So when I learned a few things about Jung's life, I could immediately identify with him. I thought, well, he's part of the family. And I love him. So for me, he's a very beloved sort of grandfather or uncle figure. He comes in my dreams once in a while. I think I see most of his flaws and foibles and have had to work on sort of forgiving him for them or putting them into the context of his life and times. Mm-hmm. But for me, he remains the great teacher. I think I use him as a reference point, like a North Star. What would Jung think about this or say about it? And then I go in my own way. But he's always around in my thinking and work and as an analyst. And private life gives a lot of guidance. His thinking, his writing is, I think, offers a pathway through life, a good one.
And is this what you also do with your analysis or patients? Obviously not quoting Jung directly, but using him as an inspiration through his teaching to overcome his problems, to look at their problems.
Oh, sure, yeah. Well, I've got Jungian theory in the back of my mind. I gave lectures some years ago, and I'll someday write them up, I think, into a book called The Four Pillars of Jungian Analysis. And the first one is the concept of individuation. And when I sit down with somebody in initial sessions, I place them on the road of individuation. Where are they? Does their chronological age match with their psychological development, or is it way off, or are there blocks? So this concept of individuation as a lifelong psychological process is very important in the back of my mind. I use that as a kind of assessment tool. So I'm thinking that I might not say anything about it, but I will definitely use it. And then, of course, when it comes to interpreting dreams, working with dreams, Jung is a reference, thinking about dream figures, especially when it gets to subjective interpretations. Mm-hmm. On the objective level, you just ask questions, what's your wife like, and what kind of personality does she have, and what are the conflicts? But on a subjective level, you dream about some woman you don't know, and I start thinking, there's a soul figure. That's a part of you. That's not an outer reality, that's an inner reality. How does that fit with your ego perspectives? What does she add? Those kinds of ideas come into working with dreams very strongly. And then the transference, countertransference, the relationship that Jung writes about so forcefully in his essay on the psychology of the transference. That diagram he draws, I use that a lot. What's going on at this level, this level, this level, and thinking about a relationship. Because I think the main part of analysis happens invisibly. Mm-hmm. And Jung's very good on that, when he talks about those Rosarian pictures. That's what's going on. You don't see that. That's at another level. But you can feel it, and you can feel the establishment of a relationship. It's deepening, it's gathering intimacy, it's coming together, it's separating, it has life, it doesn't have life. You can feel the effects of it, but you can't see it so clearly. But that's a very useful image to have in thinking about relationships. I use that. And then if I feel that active imagination is an appropriate method to use, of course I have the reference of the Red Book now, and when I trained to become an analyst, this was from 1969 to 1973 at the old Jung Institute on the Gemeindestrasse. We had courses in active imagination, and we were encouraged to do it in our own analysis. And so I heard Barbara Hanna talk about active imagination. I heard von Franz talk about active imagination. Heinrich Fiertz was a great teacher who ran the Zurichberg Clinicum Zurichberg. These people really communicated the magical quality of the psyche in a way that is quite exceptional. I don't know if it exists today in the world, but we really caught them at their peak in those years. Late 60s to the early 80s was a real high point, I feel, in that generation coming into their maturity and offering what they had learned from Jung himself. So the notion that active imagination is central to individuation is absolutely critical if you're going to develop further in the second half of life especially, but anytime, was deeply implanted in us. And I think that's been lost. Unfortunately, I'm trying to bring it back in my own way whenever I can, and maybe it's catching on since the Red Book has been published, because it's so obvious that Jung would never have become what he was without using that method of going in and following the spirit of the depths, going inward, listening to the voices, interacting with them, and developing a sense of the inner world. That's his great contribution, I think, to civilization, if you want to put it in big terms. I had a conversation one time with Michael Fordham, who came to the States on a visit, and we spent some time together, and I remember him saying, this is Michael Fordham now, the great developmental psychologist, analyst. He said, Jung's greatest contribution was the discovery of the inner world. I've never forgotten that. I think that just puts it in a nutshell. And, we're by nature, in a way, extroverted people. Everything that's real is out there. And to take the other direction and look inward is something that's not offered in the West very much. In the East, maybe more, with Buddhism and those introspective traditions, where there is some sense, at least, of the inner masters and teachers and the Buddha and nature and so on, looking at your own mind instead of looking at the outer world. But that's what Jung brings, and that's I don't think you can get there without the use of active imagination in a solid way. You can develop it through working with dreams, introspection somewhat, but it really opens it up and establishes it solidly in your consciousness if you do active imagination. So I emphasize that quite a bit. Not everybody I work with, though, do I suggest they do active imagination. Sometimes it's not appropriate, and sometimes it's essential. You don't get anywhere until you start down that road.
On this, I remember my first interview of this theory with Dr. Rabbi. He said Jung discovered the irrational side of the psyche, while Freud was working more with the rational side of the psyche, going along with them. This is why they separated. What is individuation?
Yeah, good question.
You wrote a lot.
I wrote a book about it, yeah. And I keep thinking about it. In the 7 Sermons to the Dead, which Jung wrote down, he says by dictation, sort of, he heard Philemon speak or a teacher speak, but I mean, it's his creation. And the first chapter, he talks about the two principles, the pleroma, which is the all, everything mixed together, sort of massa confusa of everything without distinction. And then there's another principle called creatura. And creatura is responsible for making distinctions. So you have the all, and then you have the dynamic factor that differentiates and makes distinctions. Before, there's no difference between up and down and here and there, and now you start finding differences. That's black, that's white, that's up, that's down. And a part of that distinction making is your separation of yourself from your surroundings. I mean, on a sensate level, that's very important, or you bump into things. You know, you have to be able to tell the difference between your own body and this table. It's much more subtle on a psychological level because we are unconscious of our, what should I say, what he calls, the mystical identification, participation mystique. We're unconscious of that. And so it takes a long time to actually get separate from your surroundings, from your parents, from your brothers, your sisters. It comes about naturally in a way. You know, I'm not like my mother because I'm a boy. I'm not like my father because I'm a thinking type and he's a feeling type. And you sort of start making your way like that. But at other levels, it takes a lifetime to come into consciousness of difference. And that is a part of individuation, this increasing consciousness of your own distinctive, unique existence as an individual. And you might come to it through crisis, like you get sick and you realize you have to die alone. You were born alone, you have to die alone. In a sense, you're never alone, but in another sense, you are very alone. You are an individual. So that's individuation, coming to yourself in your uniqueness. But there's another aspect to it that's, I think, equally important, a spiritual aspect, and that is finding yourself as what in the biblical tradition we'd call imago Dei, that you are an imago Dei, that you are in the image of God. So where is that God image in you? That is also a part of you. And that, making that connection between the ego part that's functioning in time and space and history, and you are born, you live, you die, you have your problems, and this other part that's eternal. Discovering that is also very essential in the individuation process, to know what is your basis, what you are, not who you are. Jung writes about this in Alchemy, I think quoting Dorn, says it's important to learn what you are, where you came from, who is your maker, so on. This level of identity that's beyond the ego identity, that the ego at first knows nothing about, really, is the work of usually what we say the second half of life. It can happen anytime, of course, but and then you have these two levels. You have an ego life and you have an eternal life. At one point in a lecture, Aranos Jung said, we are the Dioscuri. The Dioscuri, two twins. One brother is mortal, the other one's immortal. We are the Dioscuri. So to discover that is a part of individuation. And to, of course, we could go on talking about this for a long time, to see all the pieces that belong to you, your shadow part, your anima part, and to become conscious of these things. That's all part of individuation. And it takes a long time, and you have to go over this ground many times. You lose it, you find it. Fred Plaut wrote a wonderful autobiography called Losing and Finding. This is, as you get older, you start losing a lot of things, and then you have to find them. And I think he was reflecting on how we lose ourselves so often, and then we have to find ourselves again. And it's a constant process. It's not stable. Individuation is a topsy-turvy. Jung said its path is serpentine. It isn't a direct line of development. in a sense, and it's we keep discovering new parts of ourselves until we are no more, I think.
You just mentioned that key to individuation is active imagination. But before to talk about active imagination in the Red Book, I would like to ask you, what are dreams?
Well, dreams are, the brain is working when you're sleeping. This was a discovery of the 50s, I think, 40s or 50s, REM sleep, and it was then linked in neuroscience. They can follow or sort of establish when you are dreaming. Your brain is active during dream time, and otherwise it's more quiet. So your brain is working while you're sleeping as well as while you're waking, or while you're awake. And so what it produces while you're sleeping, and if you can remember it, we call it a dream. That's the sleeping mind thinking. And it thinks in different thoughts and different perspectives than the waking mind does. You could say the waking mind is more directed and limited in a sense. It has, our waking mind is very much conditioned by our culture, by our upbringing, our class, who we identify with, the values we identify with. We have shutters on us. Our ego is a kind of camera with, shutters that you don't see outside those shutters. Well, the dreaming mind gives you something quite different outside the shutters, often surprises you. Why am I doing that? Why am I there? So the dreams regularly surprise us. And then we ask ourselves, well, why do we dream that? Why are we thinking that way at night and we're thinking that way in the daytime? And Jung had a theory about that. That compensates. It brings us something outside these shutters that if we can understand that language, we can and add to our conscious knowledge, we will expand our conscious knowledge of ourselves, maybe of the world around us. So some dreams don't just tell us about ourselves, they can tell us about people around us, about the times we live in, about the future even. Those kinds of thoughts, Jung theorized about all this, and those theories are interesting to think about, that the unconscious, the dreaming mind, doesn't live within the same time and space constraints that the waking mind does. It can look backwards as though it were the present. It can look ahead as though it were the present or the past. It moves around in this time-space continuum. And so you can have precognitive dreams. It frequently happens that you dream about somebody you haven't thought of in years, some school friend or somebody you knew for a long time ago. And that comes back into your system, into your conscious life, and into your memory system that dropped off. Sometimes these are repressed things that you'd rather not think about. I have a pretty organized mind normally in time and space. Time is usually my friend. I keep track of time. I'm trained to do that. I look at my watch. I think in terms of days, months, years. I can name a date when I did something. Very organized. In dreams, I'm often confused. That's a part of the mind that isn't organized by my ego. And there I discover other people, places, why am I here? I can't do things that I can do in my waking mind. So in some ways it's inferior, and then in some ways it's superior. You never know. Is it going to give you this or give you that? So it's like a friend who isn't altogether reliable. You don't know if he'll show up on time, what he's going to bring you. He's going to bring you nothing, bring you a treasure. But those kind of friends are interesting to have. So I think of my dream life as a kind of trickster figure. Brings me this or brings me that, throws me a curveball, or I wake up scratching my head. Sometimes I wake up and, oh boy, I'm glad to be awake. I'm glad that wasn't material reality, but then I have to think about it. What was it then? And so this taking dreams seriously, I think, is another gift of Jung's. The first book I read of psychoanalysis was Freud's interpretation of dreams. I was, I think, 14 or 15 years old, found it in a bookstore, brought it home, read it, was fascinated. Didn't understand it that much, but it's Freud's great book, and lots of good stories.
I was 17, it was 3 essays on sexuality. Close to here, I was in Engadine with some friends. And my friend and my father and his father look at me and say, "What the hell are you reading?" And I was like, "Well, I'm trying to read these." I didn't understand the word, but that was the start of my...
That's the beginning. It's fascinating, though, just the idea of an unconscious.
Yes.
And what Freud does with it and what he makes out of it. And then when I read Jung's, my first significant reading of Jung was Memories, Dreams, Reflections, and I always say that's the book that changed my life. Mm-hmm. I was 24, 25 years old. And what he does with dreams, I couldn't put it down. I started keeping a dream journal. I thought, wow, this is really amazing. And he puts dreams at the center of his autobiography. Yeah. And records a lot of them. So obviously he remembered them from childhood and made a lot out of them. And it's like a string of pearls or landmarks on a landscape. You know, I had this dream then, and then there was that one, and each one gives you some added meaning, and some of these big dreams never leave you. You know, they're like revelations of realities. And so the dreaming mind is an amazing thing, and I think it was Jung's discovery just how big it is, how it opens up to symbolic reality. Freud had it narrowed down pretty much to, these latent dream thoughts that we don't want to know anything about, so then there's a disguise. But Jung saw it as opening up the inner world. So those are the two paths to the inner world: the dream, the royal road, as Freud called it, and active imagination, which Jung used to expand on, to open that door wider, I think, and peek into the inner life and inner world.
Your latest book, published last August, correct me if the title is not wrong, but it sounds like Bible as a Dream?
The Bible as Dream.
Jungian perspective on the metaphors of the Bible. Also, the Quran, part of the Quran, was inspired by dreams, perhaps even the Torah. Dreams are there since the early beginning.
Oh yes, dreams have been there since recorded history.
And it's interesting to me when I sit in front of a patient, or even with friends, I don't dream.
Yeah.
I don't dream. Someone even said to me, I don't dream, I think. How can we work with our patients when there are no dreams? And even what does it mean when they come in and say, I have no dreams?
Well, I think you have to be patient, because most people, normal people, don't pay attention to dreams, so they say, I have no dreams, because they aren't looking for them. But if you start thinking, well, maybe I do have a dream, and in fact, everybody dreams. I mean, you can tell them that. Yeah. In fact, you dream. It's just that you're not remembering your dreams. Some people remember dreams very easily. You know, if I see them on a weekly basis, they bring me sheafs of paper, you know, here are my dreams from the week. Others, you get one dream a month or less. So I think a lot of it has to do with tending to the dream, to the dream possibility. So the first thing, you know, you train yourself to, first thing when you wake up, don't leave immediately for the day and think, what day is this, what do I have to do? Stay with your, you know, this in-between state, a kind of twilight state as you're waking up, and if you can pull a dream back, just keep a couple of images and then later maybe write it down. Or if you wake up in the middle of the night, analysans will get into that because they want to bring dreams into analysis, so they wake up and they have a flashlight or something and make a few notes, and then they, and if you have these few points, you can often remember more of the dream. It doesn't just vanish. But probably we're constructed biologically so we don't spend too much time on dreams, because we have to pay attention to the world around us. So there's an evolutionary reason that we don't just live in a dream world. We wouldn't have survived in the material world that way. So I think partly you have to train patients to record their dreams. It might be a resistance. They might be afraid of what their dreams will show. you can discuss that with them. And then after that, I just work with what they bring. And it's a kind, and I let myself associate to what they say. There's, I remember an analyst teaching us years ago of thinking outside the box, I think it's called, or something. He said, sometimes just a random thought comes into my head, he said, and I would just say it. You just throw it in there. It might have nothing to do with what's going on, but it's like it opens up something. So you're contributing something to this medium that you're sitting in, and a bit of irrationality. If it gets too cognitive and too rational and too organized, you know you're not getting anywhere.
You lose the magic, the mystic you were mentioning before, in the 60s and the 70s.
So you have to get into a kind of space that's open to random thoughts, intuitions, even just noticing things that are going on around you, and then bring all that in. And that creates a different kind of dynamic and relationship and openness to the psyche.
It's not easy in this materialistic, fast world where we are connected 24/7.
You know, that interconnectedness, when it first started out, Facebook and all that, and the ideology of it, oh, we're going to connect the world now, it's going to be a global village, everybody's going to be related, we can all talk to each other. It sounded so good. Mm-hmm. I thought, wow, this is an advance in human evolution, that now we're going to really get over these biases, nationalism, racism, sexism. We're all going to get into a wonderful conversation. Well, that didn't happen.
Actually getting worse
and worse. It's the opposite. Yeah, because why? The dark side appears. And what did Kant say? Out of the crooked boards of humanity, nothing straight has ever been made. Human nature isn't given to perfection, creating perfect solutions, the perfect society, the most wonderful, balanced, organized social systems, and whether on a small basis of village or a huge basis of nation, there's something that enters in that doesn't allow that. And we have to take that into account. There's always going to be war. There's always going to be crime. There's always going to be illness.
And we cannot be naive about the fact that the world is improving and it will improve forever.
No.
Like Fukuyama's End of History is for me one of the biggest naivety of the late 20th century.
Yeah.
Now the world is free, liberal democracy will spread around.
It's going to automatically spread. Everybody's
going to. And we see the consequence.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. It doesn't work like that. So Isaiah Berlin, picked up on this phrase of Kant's, and I think he was very realistic about the dangers of perfectionism, perfectionistic ideologies. What did they turn into? Hitler. He was a perfectionist. We want to cleanse the human race. We want to make it perfect. So it can take these unexpected twists and turns because of the human psyche. And Jung worried about, the future of humanity because he said it all hangs on a thin tissue, and that tissue is the psyche. What does that psyche, what is it going to do? It has so much power to destroy nature, destroy our planet even, let alone just humanity. And I think we have to be aware of all of that. That doesn't mean we don't try to improve things, and we can be progressive and all that, but I think we should not be naive.
Of a continuous development and straight line.
Straight line, yeah.
To these three concepts you worked on, developed. Lifelines, liminality, and midlife. you wrote about midlife in a very interesting book. The concept of lifelines. I think it was in a paper of yours dated 2007 and then into a book too. Is very interesting. We have to understand and to be open to lifelines. What is my lifeline now? How can I be aware of this lifeline? And the concept of liminality. Without liminality, there is no individuation. Would you like to expand on these three concepts, perhaps?
Lifelines is something I don't use very much, but I remember writing about that, and I think it's kind of an Adlerian idea, these fictions, life fictions. They're narratives, and we create narratives for ourselves. This belongs to that part of our history, we live in historical time. I was born to these parents, they were born to those parents, and we have a narrative. If somebody asks you, who are you? You start telling your story. And that changes with your age and with time. And what I've learned about through my own experience, and many analysts who've reported the same thing, is that for a while you're on a path and it seems fine and you think you know where you're going and who you are and what your life is about. And then things start, either they start crumbling, they start losing meaning, other things intervene, surprising, and synchronicities sometimes, and then it goes in another direction. And that time between directions is what I refer to as liminality. I got that term from Victor Turner and Ben Genup. They talk about this in initiations. There's this in-between time, between identities, here betwixt and between, and this is a time of confusion, time of floating, a time of wandering, not uncertainty. In the book I wrote in midlife, I wrote it in my early midlife period, I use Odysseus' return home as the kind of guiding thread, and bounces around, takes him 10 years to get there. It actually took Jung, I think, about 15 years or 17 years. He started writing the Red Book, and he went, took his dive into the spirit of the depths. With the spirit of the depths in 1913, he started, probably began a little earlier, ended about 1930, so it took about 15 years. Intensively for the first couple of years, where he really was in a turmoil, and then it kind of settled down, but he didn't really have that Liverpool dream until 1928. That's when he said, finally I knew I had reached my goal. I saw the light in the center, the magnolia tree was emitting light, it was in the center of a fountain, this sense of a center, and a center of energy, and a dynamic center where all the pieces come together, the center of the mandala. Took him, 15 years to reach that. Took Odysseus 10 years to get back home to his bed in Penelope. So it's a period of time, and I encourage people not to foreclose it. Erik Erikson talked about the problem of identity foreclosure. If you close it off too fast, and you decide at the age of 18 who I am, what I'm going to do, I'm going to study this, I'm going to become a doctor or a judge or something, and you just pursue that, it leaves out too much of yourself.
You don't know yourself at that age.
No, you have no idea. You don't know who you're going to become. You know who you've been, but you don't know who you're going to become.
You want what others would like you to be.
You think that's you? See, individuation is a question. Who am I? What am I? Am I what you want me to be? Persona? Am I what my wife wants me to be? Am I what my children want me to be? Well, that's all important, but there's more. And that more is so important to hold on to. That's your eternal soul.
The more that is not there, has not been there around us, the more that we have to look for.
Yeah. We have to look for it, and we have to let it come in and do something with us, And
Jung was a courageous man. Maybe, or maybe for sure, he didn't know he would find what he found. But at some point, soon after separating from Freud, he felt the urge to go down deep, as you said, and start a writing, painting. And this is now called the Red Book.
Mm-hmm.
What is the Red Book for those that don't know what the Red Book is? We know what it is. We like it. We love it.
Yeah.
We read it. But what is the Red Book actually? Because it's something unique in the history of humanities. There is no other psychoanalyst that did something similar, to my knowledge.
No, I don't think so.
Something comparable to the Divine Comedy of Dante? Is it comparable to the Faust?
I think it's comparable to them, but it's, of course, it's different. It's unique. It's Jung. It's a personal account of his inner journey and his dialogues with these figures he discovered. And when I trained in Zurich and in Jungian circles, well, after the Memories, Dreams, Reflections was published, we knew it was there, and we had some idea of what was in it. Confrontation with the Unconscious, Chapter 6 of Memories, Dreams, Reflections. And I used that a lot, and I used that in my midlife book too. That was very important, that chapter. Of the whole book, I found that one to be the most, the deepest and the most interesting. But nobody knew what was in the Red Book, really. Well, very few people knew. It was kept under lock and key. There were rumors, that Jung had disclosed things in there that he didn't want anybody to know about or anybody to see, so it was a great hidden mystery, a secret. And then when it was published in 2009, suddenly here it was, with a great edition, facsimile, footnotes. Shamdasani did a wonderful job of editing. And now we could read it, and we could see what's there. So many people started reading it, studying it. I did, started lecturing about it. But what is it for people who don't know what it is? I was astonished that it sold so many copies. I think over 100,000 in English have been sold. Maybe more than that, quite a bit more than that. It sold fast. People bought it as a picture book. I think very few people read it at first. I called it the unread Red Book. It's hard to read. It's off-putting. I mean, and I don't care that much for the English translation. They did the best job they could. It's impossible to translate that book. I prefer to read it in German. It just sounds better to me. It's Jung's own language. But it's been translated into many languages now, including Japanese, Chinese, Russian, all the European languages by now. But what do people make of it? I think a lot of people look at the pictures. They're astonishing. He was quite a remarkable painter, amateur painter in his own way. Pictures are fascinating to look at. I look at them from time to time. You can see them hanging on people's walls now, some areas. So a couple of years ago, Thomas Arzt, who I met at ISAP, suggested we have a lunch, and he wanted to propose something to me. And so he said at lunch, why don't we offer people to write essays about the Red Book? And I thought, I think probably enough has been said. People are bored with it. But it intrigued me. So I said, okay, well, let's give it a try. I'll write some letters. I know a lot of Jungians, and see if anybody responds. We got a huge response. People were excited. They wanted to write for it. We had, before I knew it, we had about 50 people offering to write.
You have 2 volumes now.
And we have 2 volumes out, 3rd one in process. We're now even thinking about a 4th one. It sells pretty well. We've had webinars on it. And the title that we came up with is The Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions. So we're trying to look at the Red Book as a resource for our crazy times. I mean, everybody says these times are topsy-turvy, confused, split, divided, pathological. We don't know what's going to happen next. It's getting worse all the time. So how can we get something from the Red Book? How can it be a resource for those people who want to search for soul and find themselves and find some answers in a personal way through using the Red Book. And so we're not thinking of it so much as the contents as teaching us what is, this is how things are, but as a method. What did Jung do? What did he discover? How does it feel to be in an active imagination and to reflect on it? That's what you have in the Red Book. You have an entry into it, and then things start to happen. He sits there for so many nights in the desert, asks, why am I here? What's going on? So, patience, waiting, and then suddenly he hears a voice. Wait, wait. A soul starts talking to him. That's a woman, a female voice, and then he meets her, and she engages him, and she argues with him, and she isn't what he thought she would be. He was looking for his soul, but that's not what he was expecting. And then he learns that she has a life of her own, she's autonomous. Before, what he thought was a soul were just theories. Now he has the reality, and he has to live with her. This is who he has to live with, not some ideal, this one. It's like having a marriage or something. I mean, you get this one, not what you thought an ideal woman should be. You got this one. And she fights with him, and she changes, and she does this and that. And then other figures start appearing. And so you get a sense of what it's like to engage in this process of discovering the inner world. And I think that's the big teaching. If people want to go inward in these crazy times, and his times were crazy too. I mean, this is World War I times. Europe is being destroyed. The consensus, everybody thought progress would go on endlessly. It didn't, got worse. Things really got bad in the 20th century, and it just kept getting worse and worse. So we're living in a time like that. So there's a relevance, a juxtaposition of feeling about the times that he had, his dreams of the flood and Europe being flooded with blood and ice and all of that. We feel that now. Merkel is stepping down. What's going to happen next in Europe? She's held it together. Is it going to fall apart? Similar times. So if people want to engage with the spirit of the depths, which is another level, in turbulent times like this is a way to do it. It's not to re-experience what Jung experienced, but to use it as a model.
You read into my mind, because my next question would have been, why we need to look into the Red Book to have a suggestion about how to deal with these times. My PhD research is a comparison investigation about Jung's individuation and Ulrich Beck individualization, which links to Bauman liquidity.
Oh, I see.
In 2017, Beck wrote in a posthumous book, he confessed his bankruptcy, that he couldn't find a way to understand this word, even that the word is out of joint.
Mm.
As we said before, the word is not out of joint. There is progress, regression.
Mm-hmm.
Why do I say this? Because in the play you wrote with Henry Abramovitch, that I watched both at Avignon and here in Zurich a few days ago, Rabbi Beck says something I find very, very interesting to Jung. He's angry, and he's telling Jung, we looked at you for psychological insights and guidance. Isn't this what our patients want from us?
Mm.
Isn't this what we as psychoanalysts could provide to the world? And then we can also discuss whether to think of tikkun olam or not.
Mm-hmm.
This is perhaps why we need the Red Book, why, as you said, that method could help understanding the world without being naive, without being too positivistic. The Fukuyama, as we said, the Democrats' years in the US, the Obama years, which have compensated down into the Trump years.
Exactly, yeah. Yes. Well, I do look to Jung for psychological guidance and insight as we had Bexe in the play, he too did, and Jung disappointed him in those years. Later, I think he could come back to Jung, and they did have a reconciliation, and he probably could read Jung again for psychological guidance, but political, he was off. Jung underestimated the evil and was insensitive to what was going on in Germany, which is what we show in the play. How to read the times that we live in is very difficult when you're in them. In retrospect, you can see, we look back on 1913, preliminary to the First World War, and we can sort of see things going on from our perspective. They were in it, they couldn't see it quite as clearly as we can. Maybe in retrospect, this age will look like the preparation for the age of Aquarius. I mean, we're in a huge transition globally, culturally, and it was predicted long since that these in-between times are going to be turbulent. Jung foresaw dark times coming at the end of his life. Edward Edinger, who was a big Jungian in the United States, said the same thing toward the end of his life. It's going to get darker, it's going to get worse. Jung also believed that a new religion was forming, a new kind of spirituality. We see some signs of that here and there. And what he offers is a way to cope with the times, that is to go inward to find the spirit of the depths, to discover yourself, and to perhaps anticipate developments that will take a long time. There's that famous dream that Jung interpreted that it would take 600 years for the next religion to come into being. And in between these times, it's going to be, very individualistic, very split and broken, but gradually that will come together. And if we anticipate that too quickly, I thought, Facebook, that's it. Now everybody's going to get together and we'll build something new. Wrong. No. Facebook is corrupt and in it for money, and so I think we have to be very patient with it and sort of keep the faith. Is it going to turn out well, or is it going to get really just go to hell? We don't know, but I somehow have the feeling, the belief that the positive outweighs the negative by just a little bit. Mm-hmm. It isn't one or the other, but it outweighs it by enough so that in the process of history, things don't just completely fall to pieces and never recover. They fall to pieces and they recover, and you go to another stage of consciousness. And without that, I think I would hang up my analyst's robe and lock the door and go play golf.
Yeah. I would like to end our conversation with 3 straightforward questions. First one, what is love?
It's a very difficult word. It's a word, love. It's a word. That's what it is. But it's a reality that people talk a lot about in many different ways, poets and writers and lovers. My feeling is what love is it's the glue that holds things together, that connects. It's the linking energy in the universe. It links. People talk about, everything is connected, the unified field, non-duality, all of that. I think that's love. I think it's what holds the pieces together, holds humans together, gives us compassion, gives us a feeling for nature, animals, the universe. So we have it, but it's in nature too. It's the glue. That's the way I think about it.
Second question. What is freedom?
Again, difficult choice. It's a difficult word to understand, but it's we have a little bit of it. We're so influenced, we're so unconsciously molded and shaped and influenced that often we fall into the illusion that we have freedoms that we don't have. That we're puppets in a sense, we don't know it. But I think there is some freedom a freedom to think is the most precious freedom in my mind. Freedom to think your own thoughts, to let your mind be free. We often can't act on what we feel, what we know, but we can think it. So to open the mind to its freedom, to let it be free, that's what I try to do in analysis, let the mind be free. To float and think and entertain possibilities. And then from those maybe you can choose some options. But not to go too fast. Yeah.
Last question. Do you believe in God, Dr. Stein?
Jungians can't answer that question after Jung's answer. I don't believe I know. I'm a Christian. Okay, I was raised as a Christian. I remain a Christian, not in a dogmatic sense at all, in a mythological sense, but I freely entertain the possibility of love in the universe, and that to me is the divine principle. So I guess I would have to say, I can't say I believe or I know. Somewhere in between, I have faith that there is this power of love that is stronger than the power of hate, and will prevail ultimately. Yeah.
That's a nice way to finish. Thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome.
It has been a great pleasure.
Thank you, Stefano.